Welcome to Within the Frame, where we delve into the most up-to-date issues from across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gyan. As the second term of President Donald Trump begins, the global landscape is bracing for significant shifts in U.S. foreign policy, especially with respect to the Korea-U.S. alliance and the evolving dynamics to Northeast Asia. To discuss these critical developments, we are joined by experts to examine how the Trump administration's America First approach may impact key issues such as North Korea, China, and South Korea's role in maintaining a balanced foreign policy. For more on this, we invite Min Jeong-hun, professor at Korean National Diplomatic Academy, here in the studio with us. Welcome, Professor.
My pleasure.
And also joining us is Robert Kelly, Professor of International Relations at Busan National University. Thank you for your participation, Professor.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with Professor Min. So President Trump has started his second term already, and he declared the era of America First 2.0, signaling significant changes to, global security order. How do you expect Trump's foreign policy to proceed in his second term, and how will it be different from his first term?
Yes, the foreign policy of the second Trump government will try to secure American interests on the international stage by revitalizing the America First foreign policy. It means that rather than presenting new policy directions, it is likely that the second Trump government will try to make the major policy achievements of the Trump era based on the experiences of the first Trump government. And to secure American interests more aggressively, it will strengthen strategic selection and concentration, protectionist approach, and the transaction-oriented alliance view. And most importantly, I think, the President Trump will actively use tariffs to reduce the U.S. trade deficits, and he will also promote the revival of the U.S. manufacturing industry through the strategic national manufacturing initiatives. And he also denies the Biden government's achievements of climate change and eco-friendly energy policies, and that it will promote the expansion of the fossil fuel supply and reduce and abolish eco-friendly energy subsidies. In addition, Trump government will be aggressive on tracking the rise of China, and it will use the selective decoupling centered on advanced technologies, and it will push China in terms of the trade deficits and other things. So I think that the two countries will engage in kind of the second the trade war. And finally, regarding the Korean Peninsula, I think that the ROK-US alliance will be durable during the second Trump government because of the South Korea's strategic interests on the United States. I think that President Trump perceives that South Korea is an important partner in the fields of security, economy, technology, and energy in order to track the rise of China and secure U.S. interests and the economic interests in the region. However, securing South Korea's interests in the face of President Trump's transaction-oriented alliance view and America First, the foreign trade policy, will be a major task and challenge in the ROK-US relationship under the second Trump government. And meanwhile, the summit diplomacy between North Korea and the United States will be revitalized, I think, in the coming months.
Meanwhile, concerns are growing about crisis in Seoul-Washington ties due to the current, political turmoil we're experiencing in South Korea following, the impeachment crisis. Since the Korea-U.S. alliance is based on values like democracy and the rule of law, Professor, how do you think the domestic political situation would really affect Seoul and Washington's alliance?
Well, you remember that recently South Korean Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yeol had his first phone call with the new U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. And during the phone call, they discussed bilateral relations and North Korean nuclear issues and trilateral cooperation among South Korea, U.S., and Japan. And Minister Cho welcomed Rubio's inauguration, and he also expressed his expectation to further develop the 70-year ROK-U.S. alliance under the second Trump government. And Secretary Rubio mentioned that the alliance is the main pillar of peace and security on the Korean Peninsula and in the region. He reaffirmed the U.S. ironclad defense commitment to South Korea. And they also agreed to maintain close cooperation on North Korea's nuclear issues, and also agreed to further develop the trilateral cooperation. So I think that the alliance remains strong despite the political turmoil in South Korea. But personally, I think it's necessary to get over the ongoing political turmoil in South Korea as soon as possible, at least to normalize the summit diplomacy and enhance South Korea's the cooperation with the United States.
Mm-hmm. But as for the U.S. President, Donald Trump, he has refrained from making any official comments on South Korea's current state of emergency. Professor Kelly, what do you think is the reason behind this?
I think first of all, I don't think Donald Trump particularly cares that much about Korean issues. I think there's sort of obviously interest in Korea because of the importance of the alliance with South Korean foreign policy. But Donald Trump is mercurial. He's disinterested. He doesn't read or study. He spends a great deal of time watching television and playing on his phone and making phone calls. I mean, Donald Trump is not committed to the liberal international order. He's not committed to U.S. allies in any kind of meaningful way, right? I mean, he's talked about invading Canada. I mean, if he wants to invade Canada and Greenland and the Panama Canal, something like that, I don't think he particularly cares much about NATO or South Korea or anything else. So I think that's something that American allies are really not prepared for, is the level of disinterest that Trump will probably show. For example, if South Korea builds nuclear weapons, I don't think Donald Trump would care. And so the result of that, I think, is that if Trump pays attention to Korea, it's going to be a sort of recitation of Trump's grievances in the past. I think at the middling level, sort of below him, so for example, Secretary Rubio, I do think that there continues to be robust commitment by American elites in the State Department, the Defense Department, in the think tank community. I do think there continues to be a robust commitment to South Korea. There are a lot of people in Washington who want the alliance, in part because of fear of rising China. There's conflict in Taiwan. ROK bases would probably be American bases in South Korea would probably be used for that. But I mean, at the level of the president himself and the people around him, it's hard to know what he would do on South Korea. I would argue that South Korea should actually be quite cautious in dealing with Donald Trump, flatter him, make some concessions to him, things like that, because Trump is so erratic and his behavior on the alliance was pretty unpredictable the first time through.
Yeah, so it really is unpredictable as we speak, and it's going to be. But South Korea and the U.S. have a lot of things to engage in, especially in terms of negotiations. Professor Min, what kind of issues do you think are the most urgent to be resolved?
Personally, again, I think that the South Korea needed to be cautious in terms of President Trump's transaction-oriented alliance view and America First trade policy. So there are lots of issues that South Korea needed to take care of against the Trump second government. But I think that trade issues would be most urgent for South Korea. As you know, President Trump is very aggressive in making his moves in the trade sector. He confirmed right after taking office, he will actively use tariffs to reduce U.S. trade deficits and to secure a better trade environment for the United States. And for example, he mentioned that he could impose 25% of tariffs on Canada and Mexico, and possibly additional 10% of tariffs on China, maybe on the January 1st. And probably, luckily, there has been no comments on South Korea yet, but I think it's very likely that South Korea will be on the list sooner or later. So I think it's necessary for South Korea to prepare for the aggressive moves in the trade sector of the Trump government to reduce its trade deficits on South Korea. As you know, South Korea is one of the trade surplus countries against the United States. So I think that President Trump will be definitely aggressive in terms of the trade the matters with South Korea. So I think it's necessary for South Korea to make alternatives like the importing more energies and other things from the United States to reduce the trade deficit. And meanwhile, there is a possibility that the summit diplomacy between North Korea and the U.S. will be revitalized in the coming months. So it is necessary for South Korea to make a plan showing how South Korea would facilitate the talks between the two countries and continue to communicate with the United States. It's mainly because South Korea needed to remain during the process of the talks.
Right. And Trump had been preferring a top-down approach when it comes to diplomacy. Now, in the context of leadership gaps caused by the political turmoil here in South Korea, Professor Kelly, what kind of foreign policy measures could South Korea pursue at this point in situation?
Yeah, I think the best thing in terms of bringing around the Trump administration would be for Korea to resolve this internal turmoil so that there is a head of state who can meet Trump personally. Trump really personalizes foreign policy. We know this from the way he talks about, particularly about dictators. You know, Kim Jeong-hun is his friend, Vladimir Putin is his friend. He said that he likes leaders who like him. He will want to meet an elected, undisputed leader in South Korea. He will not want to meet an acting president, much less the current acting president, because the acting president was impeached, right? The sooner this gets wrapped up, the sooner I think Trump might be willing to meet a South Korean president. I would be surprised if Trump came to Korea. I would imagine that he would expect a Korean president to come to him, right? Trump likes the perception of domination and supplication and everything. But I would imagine he will not call the current acting president, that the relationship will remain limited to sort of the defense and foreign minister level until the turmoil is resolved here. But again, I'm just not sure that Trump really cares that much. I would argue it's more important what Secretary Rubio and possible Secretary of Defense Hegseth think about the relationship than Donald Trump himself, because Trump is so unfocused. He flits from topic to topic. I'm just not sure that his particular interest in Korea, one way or another, is important. I would argue that it's actually the cabinet that will probably end up setting policy more than Trump himself.
Right. So at this point, what South Korea could do is to engage in talks with cabinet members, right?
That's my sense of it, yeah. Because, I mean, for example, like Marco Rubio was on the phone yesterday with the South Korean foreign minister. He said all the right things. That's great, right? He's saying with the alliance, this is better security. It's all these good things that we sort of want U.S. and South Korean ministers to say to one another. And those are the kinds of things that Donald Trump just will not say. I mean, we know that. And Trump is not going to go on TV and say that, he supports extended deterrence over Korea. He's just not going to say that. Biden would have, but Donald Trump is not going to do that. So I would encourage, actually, South Korea to avoid dealing with Trump, because all you do is kind of provoke him. I would encourage South Korea to work through sort of lower level channels, right? Through the State Department, the Defense Department, U.S. Forces Korea, things like that. I think going to the White House is probably a mistake, because Trump's last White House was very, very chaotic. I don't know if Trump is going to care that much about Korea. Who knows what he'll say? It strikes me as unnecessarily risky.
Right. And as for discussions with Trump, we will have to wait until a new leadership is elected here in South Korea. Now, we've been talking about the engagement of South Korea's Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yeol and U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. They had their first call after Trump's inauguration, and they vowed to strengthen alliance. What kind of further efforts do you think are needed to, strengthen Seoul and Washington's high-level communication, Professor Min?
Yes, as you mentioned, the Minister Cho had the first phone call with the Secretary Rubio recently. And during the phone call, the Secretary Rubio invited the Minister Cho over to Washington, and they agreed to coordinate the details to hold in-person talks in Washington at the earliest the possible date. And Minister Cho also stressed the importance of close communication between the countries, including the need for phone call between acting President Choi Sang-mok and President Trump. And Secretary Rubio answered that he would make every necessary effort for the phone call. Of course, there is a limitation that the high-level talks between like the presidential level, because the South Korea is going through the political turmoil, and South Korea has got the president, acting president Choi. So it would not be desirable to have the deep talks and conversation between the two leaders of the countries. But I think that the South Korea need to do as much as possible under the limitations. So I think that it is very important to expand the in-person contact and talks for the high level officials. And considering that Trump government just begins the term, it's very important to strengthen high-level communication and try to enhance the mutual understanding and build mutual trust, because the new cabinet members of the second Trump government, they have little understanding and trust with the existing South Korean high-level officials. And as the Professor Kelly mentioned, I also think that President Trump cares about personal relationships and the trust with his counterparts. So it's very important to expand in-person contact between high-level officials, including presidential level. So for the purpose, it's very important to get over the political turmoil in South Korea and normalizing government. The South Korean government is very important to revitalize the summit diplomacy with President Trump.
Right. So it also circles back to resolving the current political situation here in South Korea. Now, on his first day in office, President Trump acknowledged North Korea's nuclear capabilities, calling it nuclear power, and expressed his intention to resume talks with the regime. Professor Kelly, how will the second Trump administration's approach to Pyongyang nuclear issue differ from previous administration? Additionally, do you think there's a possibility of Trump bypassing South Korea and negotiating directly with Pyongyang?
Sure. I think the second question is easier to answer than the first, and the answer to that is almost certainly. Again, Donald Trump enjoys displays of dominance. Donald Trump enjoys the media attention, the perception that he's this path-breaking statesman doing important things. He believes that summit diplomacy is this meeting of sort of important men discussing big issues, right? And he very clearly and explicitly cut out Moon Jae-in in the negotiations back in 2018, 2019. And he did that, I mean, he didn't really like Moon Jae-in anyway, but he did that mostly because he wanted to sort of not share the spotlight with other people. And if Trump comes back to North Korea, I would imagine he will do exactly the same thing. He is just not going to include what he will see as a middle or small power like South Korea when he's doing big, great power diplomacy. He's going to want to do it one-to-one, and South Korea will be cut out. Again, this is one of the reasons why I would encourage South Korea to avoid working with the White House, because Donald Trump just doesn't care that much, right? I mean, Donald Trump has a kind of a bullying attitude about small and medium-powered states, even those who are close friends of the United States, like Canada, right? I mean, he's threatened to invade Canada, right? Is he really going to care about South Korea? I really doubt that. And I think this is something that South Korean elites need to grasp, is that Trump is not going to be a good faith interlocutor with South Korea, in my opinion. His staff will. Marco Rubio is a traditionalist, he will, right? But Trump will not be, right? And then if Trump goes to North Korea, honestly, no, I don't think anybody can really make any prediction what Trump will bring back, right? It's worth pointing out that Trump didn't really learn the issues very well back in 2018. He flew to Singapore, got off the plane, didn't know what the issues were, just walked into the room, saluted the North Korean general on television. I mean, he just didn't know what he was doing. And that happened again in Hanoi, where he didn't know the issues very well, right? He didn't know how to negotiate with Min Jeong-hun. So he just walked out because he didn't learn anything about ballistic missiles, nuclear weapons, and so on. And has Donald Trump learned anything new about nuclear technologies? Has he learned the issues in Korea in the last 8 years? Almost certainly not. So if we have a repeat of diplomacy by Trump, it's probably going to be what it was last time. It's going to be a lot of TV. It's going to be a lot of attention. It'll be very thin on the substance. I would be enormously surprised if the Trump administration has puts any kind of major policy process work into this that works up or develops a major compromise offer to North Korea. For example, recognize them as a nuclear weapon state if they install cameras in their facilities or something. I mean, there are all kinds of modalities that could be worked out. But the Trump people did no work on that whatsoever 5-6 years ago, and I would be shocked if they do that again. I mean, the Trump team just has no legacy of that. Like Marco Rubio doesn't have any particular expertise in North Korea, for example. So I don't know. I mean, I'm hopeful, right? Trump will probably do more than other presidents, at least to make an effort. I suppose that's not bad. But I would be amazed if Trump makes a U-turn and suddenly is more disciplined and focused in his Korea diplomacy.
So if talks between North Korea and the U.S. take place, there are discussions of a small deal progressing towards nuclear disarmament or freezing. However, a small deal directly contradicts South Korea's policy of denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, of course. Professor, do you think, in this case, how do you think South Korea should respond? And what about the possibilities?
For me? I think a small deal is a much better approach than a big deal. The issues between the United States, South Korea, and North Korea are so big, the strategic gaps are so large, the ideological differences are enormous, there's a huge legacy of mistrust going back 75, 80 years now, that trying to resolve all this in one big mega deal, like, for example, the Camp David Accords that resolved the Israel-Egypt tension of 30 years, that was very hard to do. It took a lot of work. That is probably off the table. Some kind of like Gestalt shift deal where the whole thing changes, that's probably impossible. I've argued in my writing for a decade that the way to do this is to sort of do small things with the North Koreans, like exchange inspectors, for example, in North Korean facilities for rollback of one sanction that the North Koreans particularly want eliminated, for example. I mean, there are lots of sort of small things we could do to build trust and sort of work our way up towards a bigger deal. I think Trump wants the mega deal because it plays great on TV. Maybe it'll get him a Nobel that he so desperately wants, but that's probably not going to happen, right? I mean, the Trump team tried that. They spent 2 years working on that. The North Koreans didn't make the concessions necessary, and it all fell apart. So if the Trump people are going to go back and they actually want progress, if they actually care enough to want to change things on the peninsula, yeah, I think the most obvious way to do it is to go for small board deals that build towards some larger deal, which might include a summit between Trump and Kim again. But if you put the summit before the policy work, you're going to get what you got last time, which is a lot of TV and then no deal. So again, we'll have to see if the Trump people are going to approach this with greater discipline and focus than last time.
Right. So small steps should be taken first to build, regain trust between the two countries. Now, let's move on to China, Professor Min. Contrary to expectations after his inauguration, Trump had been, showing some willingness to engage in dialogue with China. How do you foresee the future of Washington-Beijing relations?
Well, now after taking office, I think President Trump is knocking the door on China and try to figure out how the President Xi Jinping would respond to his moves. But basically, I think the second Trump government will be very aggressive on tracking the rise of China, and its core will be the trade sector, like the selective decoupling centered on the high-tech industries and the second U.S.-China trade war. And other than the trade sector, like the security and the politics and other things, and including Taiwan, I think President Trump will try to maintain the status quo and try to manage those situations, not to make some kind of problems in terms of dealing with China. So just going back to the trade sector, I think that President Trump and the second Trump government will be very aggressive in terms of the making the United States like the manufacturing powerhouse. So I think that the Trump government will pursue the reshoring plan and try to have the strategic decoupling with China centered on steel, electronics, pharmaceuticals, and advanced technologies. And meanwhile, tariffs will be used as a key means to reduce U.S. trade deficit with China. And such measures will result in the strong opposition from China. So the conflict between U.S. and China across trade sector is likely to lead a second U.S.-China trade war. And regarding the South Korea positions between the U.S. and China, I think personally it's not plausible anymore for South Korea to keep the balance or the equal distance between the two countries. And as you know, U.S. is leading the high-tech industries, which is the economic engine for South Korea's prosperity for the future. And so South Korea needed to enhance its economic and technological cooperation with the United States, just for the economic survival and the economic prosperity of the country. Meanwhile, China is still important economic partner for South Korea. So I think that South Korea needs to manage its relations with China as much as possible. But the normal equal distance between the two countries, leaning toward the United States, at least for the economic and technological matters, and try to manage relations with China as much as possible. But it would be very different. So it will be a new normal for South Korea's positions between two countries.
All right. I'm afraid we'll have to leave our discussion right here. Many thanks again to Professor Min and Professor Kelly for your insights. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
That'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.